Once again, for Holistic Healing, I'm at the Integrative Healthcare Symposium, where I look forward to interviewing some of my favorite health-promoting heroes, Dr. Mark Hyman and Dr. David Perlmutter. Dr. Perlmutter is the author of Grain Brain and Brain Maker, both New York Times best-selling books. Thank you for talking to Holistic Healing today.
I'm delighted. Thanks for having me.
Could you please tell us why nutrition is so essential for brain health?
You know, over the years I've been writing about nutrition from the perspective of carbohydrates and fat and protein and the micronutrients in terms of how they directly influence the brain. And the new paradigm is to look at these components of our foods through the lens of the microbiome. In other words, how do these foods nurture or damage the 100 trillion organisms that live within us that actually play such a huge role as it relates to brain health? And that's new information, it's new territory.
It seems like we're trending to think about gut health more than ever before, that we have two brains, down here and we have up here. Could you elaborate on?
Well, we do focus on gut health now a lot more because we realize, yes, there's a gut-heart connection, a gut-brain connection, a gut connection to immune function as it relates to cancer, for example, a gut connection to metabolism as it relates to our ability to deal with sugar, for example, or carbohydrates. So it turns out that that interface between inside the gut and the rest of the body, that one cell thick epithelium, is really a pivot point for understanding the health and resistance to disease of human physiology. So it's, here I am, a neurologist focused now on the gut, and it all begins at the gut. That is our most important interface with our entire environment around us, and lots of things happen there.
I notice when people are constipated, they're more inclined to feel depressed, and perhaps the other way around, if they're depressed, they're more inclined to feel constipated because they're not digesting well.
Right.
So are you encouraging your patients to get good fiber-rich diets, get lots of enzymes, drink water, exercise?
Well, I don't necessarily say that all patients need digestive enzymes. We reserve those for people who do have malabsorption issues or who are in need of additional digestive enzymes. It turns out these days that's pretty common, especially because people seem to be so vested in the notion of trying to reduce their stomach acid, and therefore they're not activating their digestive enzymes. Therefore, they're not absorbing their nutrients. But that said, there's a lot that we do to nurture the good gut bacteria with both fermented food that is a probiotic and prebiotic fiber-rich foods as well. The jicama, artichoke, dandelion greens, onions, leeks, garlic, all these foods have within them high levels of what we call prebiotic fiber, which is a unique type of fiber that nurtures the health of our bacterial symbionts.
Now, in my practice, I've been a big advocate of supplementing with omega-3 fatty acids, and I know you are too. Why is that so essential?
Well, from my perspective, specifically DHA is a real critical brain nutrient. It's a fundamental building block of membranes in neurons, in brain neurons. But beyond that, it is actually what we call an epigenetic factor. DHA actually helps to augment the gene pathway for transcription of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or basically growth hormone for the brain, which then enhances the growth of new brain cells and even the connection of brain cells to each other, which we call neuroplasticity, and that is fundamental for how we learn things and memory function.
What would you recommend as a really good thing to do to prevent Alzheimer's?
Exercise.
Okay, and how about nutrition too?
Good. Exercise, everybody asks me, what's the most important nutritional supplement? I say it's exercise. It's nutrition if you want, for your soul. But exercise is really the best way to amplify, as I just mentioned, BDNF. But beyond that, we need to focus on a critically low carbohydrate, higher fat, higher fiber, nutrient-dense, mostly vegetarian diet.
And I know you talk about that in Grain Brain.
I talk about it actually in both books.
Yeah.
Very fundamental.
That's terrific. So for Alzheimer's, would you recommend supplementing with omega-3s as well?
Oh, I think it's very important. So if you're not eating a lot of wild fish, or fish in general, hoping that it's wild, I typically recommend between 1,000 to up to 1,200, even 1,400 milligrams a day of DHA. That can be fish-derived, it can be algae-derived. I'm not as keen on krill-derived DHA because I worry about the environmental impact of krill harvesting.
Now, about ADHD, we seem to have a lot of diagnoses. It's very prevalent in this country. When do you come across any patient presenting with ADHD that is getting all the sleep they need, that's basically sugar-free in their diet, that exercises daily, and it's not deficient in omega-3s? Do you see those? do some cases?
Well, we do. There are certainly challenging patients who seem to be doing almost everything, but what we didn't mention there was gluten-free, and that turns out to be actually a very big player. A lot of individuals we see with ADHD have had significant exposure to antibiotics in their past. So, the first question that I ask, maybe it's not the first question, but is, were you breastfed? Even before that, I might ask, were you delivered by C-section or vaginal delivery? We know that cesarean section is associated with tripling of the risk for ADHD. So here we have 6.4 million American children carrying that diagnosis, and incredibly, 2/3 of them are on stimulant medication or other form of medication, the long-term consequences of which we don't know. So when we see these correlation studies that correlate risk for that problem, ADHD, with how you were born, it's not saying that's causality, but we have to pay attention to that and opt for, whenever possible, natural vaginal childbirth, reducing exposure of children to antibiotics, encouraging mothers to breastfeed. That's associated with a reduced risk of ADHD.
I should say my wife breastfed our first kid for 2.5 years and our second kid for 3.5 years, which is pretty stellar. And I supported it all the way, and I think it's a wonderful thing that she's done that.
Well, it's a lot more than just what are the nutrients of breast milk versus what are the nutrients of infant formula. There is a psychological event when those eyes are making contact with each other, but children are obtaining microbiome primers, bacteria from the skin of mother's breast as well, that are, this is a process that's been honed for millions and millions of years, and suddenly, mothers are told, oh, just use formula, it's just as good, and that's ridiculous.
As a nation, we're very sleep deprived. I think about 30% of American adults are not getting the sleep they need, 7.5 hours on the average, and our teenagers, about 70% are sleep deprived. Could you speak to how essential that is for our brain health?
Well, it's very essential. We see correlative studies now that clearly show relationships between sleep, inappropriate sleep hygiene, and risk for Alzheimer's, for example, ADHD, depression, etc. So it's during sleep that many wonderful things happen, including this activation of what's called the glymphatic system. And that's a system in the brain that actually tends to tidy up and rid the brain of the detritus of the day's work. When you don't do that, your brain basically doesn't take the garbage out, and that's not healthy.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but the average start time for high schools in our nation right now is 8 a.m., which is very early.
Yes.
And there's a trend now to have the school start later, because most of the kids are sleep deprived. There's an organization called Start School Later. In fact, I'm the Rockland County chapter leader for this. We have 60 chapters in America, and we're all doing the best we can to educate and lobby the school districts, the superintendents, the school boards, the state to do whatever we could to nudge a little later, like the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended a couple of Novembers ago that no school starts before 8:30. This is important, don't you think?
I think it's important. The reason that a lot of, at least high schools, have such an early start time is because they offer what's called a split shift.
Yes.
They have a morning group, lunch, and they have the afternoon group. And the reason they do that is because they are stretched for school resources. So they're trying to leverage the school twice in a day. And it is compelling. But it's very true that especially kids who are on teams, sports teams, or have lots of homework, they stay up late, then they have to get up early again, and this becomes cumulative, and they get behind.
I know, and they're getting on the average 7 hours sleep.
Yeah, it's not enough.
2 hours short, a lot of homework, and the natural sleep-wake cycle shifts. Teenagers don't get tired till 11 o'clock.
And there is, kids are on computers at night too, and that is interrupting, it's compromising their ability to fall asleep in the first place. It extends the length of time that they actually get into sustainable sleep, that is restorative sleep, so there's a lot of factors.
Yeah, I think 90% of Americans are looking at screens before they go to sleep. And it stimulates the pineal gland, suppresses melatonin.
Right.
So I'm always encouraging my patients, my clients as well, to shut the TV off or listen to music or a podcast or an audiobook or read, but illuminate what you're reading with a candle or a book light so your eyes aren't taking any light in.
That's right, especially lately with the Republican debates. You don't want to be watching TV at night. That's a bit of a political statement, but let's go with it.
Well, yeah, you could get angry. It's more entertainment now than I think policy, more than anything else. Okay, so if you could talk about Grain Brain briefly, and then, of course, Brain Maker.
Well, Grain Brain I wrote several years ago. This is a book that is now in 27 countries, so it's a global phenomenon that really just focused on three things: eliminating gluten, reducing your carbohydrates and sugars, and adding healthful fat back to the table. Basically, it is a scientific endeavor with me researching hundreds and hundreds of research articles that allowed me to reach these conclusions. In addition, coupled to my clinical experience in using these premises in dealing with neurological problems with great success. Brain Maker, the other New York Times bestseller, now looks at these previous dietary recommendations through the lens of our microbiome, of the 100 trillion organisms that live in the gut. And it turns out that what's best for the microbiome is, in fact, what I had recommended in Grain Brain. Again, low carb, higher fat, lots and lots of prebiotic fiber in general, but talking about how we care for or we threaten the microbiome by overusage of antibiotics, by eating foods that are genetically modified that have been sprayed with glyphosate, for example, things that very commonly affect the microbiome. Drugs, non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs, proton pump inhibitors, the whole array of medications that have never really fully been explored in terms of their effects on the microbiome, and it matters a whole heck of a lot.
Do you think that all adults should be supplementing with some probiotic?
I think these days, yes. I mean, I would indicate that if we were eating, as our Paleolithic ancestors did, 125 grams of prebiotic fiber a day, and not as obsessed with hygiene, then we would have lots of bugs on us and in us. That isn't how we are these days, so I think a good probiotic is a good idea.
Also, we're not exercising 3 hours a day like
That's
Paleolithic
right.
man did too, so I think it's harder to process that meat. I know when I eat meat, which is rare and it's grass-fed, I'm going to eat it with onions all the time and garlic, which it helps for digestion.
Yes.
It's more alkaline
But also,
too.
those are good source of prebiotic fibers.
Exactly. So for your own diet, what are you eating all the time? What do you eat?
I eat basically as described in the book. I typically don't eat breakfast. I eat a lot of eggs, a lot of steamed vegetables and sautéed vegetables with eggs. That's typically midday. But I cover everything with extra virgin organic olive oil.
Very good.
Dinner can typically be a fish, wild fish. On occasion, I will have meat, which is grass-fed, organically raised, or pasture-raised chicken. I think I love the foods that I eat. I don't feel like I'm deprived in the least.
Yeah, I try to say to all my clients who are working with weight loss, it's good to eat whatever you want, but you want to eat healthily.
That's
so
right.
if you use as a barometer how early hunter-gatherers ate, they eat all fruits and vegetables and seeds and nuts, and they eat meat, which was wild game. They ate fish, which was pure and
Right.
plentiful, and poultry. Most cultures, as you know, only became agricultural 10 to 13,000 years ago when we started domesticating animals, and we would introduce beans to our diet. We also introduced grains to our diet, which we know it's not necessary.
The requirement in the human diet for carbohydrate is 0 grams a day. There is no established
Is that so?
requirement for carbohydrate, none whatsoever. Why? Because we can manufacture sugar. We can make sugar from protein, right? Gluconeogenesis. So, the whole notion that we have to have these healthy whole grain carbs on board, or that the brain needs glucose to function appropriately, is totally not in step with current science. We know the brain functions wonderfully when it is fed beta-hydroxybutyrate, for example, or a ketone as a fuel, and it just takes people a long time to get their arms around that notion. Our hunter-gatherer forebears didn't have access to carbohydrates. They might have berries and ripened fruit at the end of the summer and the early fall, and when they would eat those, much like the bear who's preparing to hibernate needs to double its body fat, humans would do that. That would signal insulin. We would make more body fat and make it through the times of caloric restriction, i.e. the winter time. Now people have access to carbs 365 days a year, but the mechanism continues to work. In other words, fat storage. It's really quite straightforward.
Now, I've been sugar-free for 36 years. I'll never touch it. And when I share that fact with my clients, they're usually very impressed. And I say, I'm not trying to impress you, but to impress upon you that if you really value and respect and honor your body, and then you learn how bad sugar is, which you have a background in nutrition, not unlike you, but it's easy to not eat it when you know how bad this stuff
so
is.
many people have talked about sugar being basically poisonous. Gary Taubes, Robert Lustig, and there are a lot of people out there talking about it. And I'm just echoing the science and indicating that there's nothing healthful about sugar.
Yeah. So would you say that would be the first thing we should eliminate? First,
Yes.
do no harm, no sugar whatsoever.
Above all, do no harm. Right.
Very good. Thank you for talking to me
Great,
today.
my pleasure.
Wonderful,
I
David.
appreciate it. Thanks.
That it's not the calories that matter, it's the composition of your diet. It's the quality of your diet and the information in the food that matters. And it's not all about calories in, calories out. It's really different than that. Eat less and exercise more, that's the most ridiculous diet I've ever heard of, right? And it's all about this concept of physics. Well, how could it not be true? Because if all calories are just a sort of unit of energy, right? It's how much energy is needed to raise the temperature of 1 liter of water 1 degree centigrade. That should be a fixed thing, right? But it's true in the laboratory when you burn them, but not when you eat them, because the calories have to go through your metabolism, and it's different. And the thing that people miss is that this first law of thermodynamics is about energy is conserved in a closed system. The body's not a closed system. And so when you actually have different foods, carbs and fats and other foods, have very different effects on your metabolic rate, on fat storage, on hunger. All of it depends on dietary composition because food is information, as I learned from Jeff, not calories. And it triggers shifts to push you towards catabolism, which is burning fat, or anabolism, which is storing fat. And it's regulating hormones like insulin and adiponectin and resistin and leptin and cytokines and neurotransmitters. All these things are regulated when you eat different kinds of food. And certain foods turn on the good signals and certain foods turn on the bad signals. Certain foods like sugar are highly addictive. Now we know that the biology of addiction in food is real. That David proved this and many others have proved that certain foods literally are biologically addictive. In fact,
So thank you for speaking about holistic healing today. I'd like to ask you first, why should we be eating fat to get thin?
Well, you know, we've all been taught that fat makes you fat, right? The government told us to eat 6 to 11 servings of bread, rice, cereal, and pasta every single day. And we listened, and we got very fat. America's now massively obese, 70% overweight. We have diabetes rates skyrocketing. It's all because we cut out the fat, eating low-fat cookies, low-fat yogurt, low-fat salad dressing, and we are actually screwing up our metabolism because fat actually helps you lose weight, and carbs and refined sugars make you gain weight. And it does so by increasing insulin, whereas fat actually cuts down the insulin, releases fat from your fat cells, speeds up your metabolism, and more importantly, it cuts off the hunger switch. You don't want to eat as much.
Well, we know that in our country we have about 10,000 commercials a year for food products and processed foods that are hypnotizing the masses to do things we would never do intuitively. All this marketing, if it's successful, destroys the instinct and intuition for humans to just do the normal thing, eating whole foods, okay? So in your diet, what do you recommend? What would be the healthiest thing to be eating regularly?
Well, I recommend in Eat Fat Get Thin, my book, I recommend something called the Pegan diet, which is essentially kind of a joke, but it's a combination of paleo and vegan. Essentially, it's lots of vegetables, non-starchy vegetables, and it's good quality fats, avocados, almonds, all kinds of nuts, walnuts, pecans, macadamia nuts, lots of seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds, pumpkin seeds, and lots of extra virgin olive oil, coconut butter, and grass-fed meats, chicken, wild fish, sardines, herring, mackerel, all that stuff is great for you. And that's predominantly what you should be eating, some fruits that are low glycemic fruits, minimal grains and beans because they are starchy and they're also inflammatory for some people.
So if you're eating the perfect diet, do you think it's good to supplement with some things like with omega-3 from a good fish oil? Would that be a good thing?
Well, supplements are an interesting topic because I would say that we don't need any supplements, but only under certain conditions. Only if we have wild animal food and wild plants, only if we sleep 9 hours a night, have no chronic stress, have pure clean water, and exposed to no environmental toxins, then I don't think we need vitamins or minerals to support us. But if you don't have that life, yeah, you kind of do.
Okay, I'd like to ask you about coffee. Do you think we should drink coffee? A little bit? None? What do you think?
I think everybody's genetically different and metabolizes coffee differently, and some people it increases adrenaline and it increases cortisol and it makes you stressed even more, affects sleep. So I think there are challenges to coffee. Some people tolerate it well and can have a cup of coffee in the morning, it's no problem. So it's really personal preference. I think there's lots of antioxidants in coffee. It's probably the biggest source of antioxidants in the American diet, unfortunately. But I think coffee can be part of a healthy lifestyle.
Okay, could you speak to the essentials of sleep, getting good sleep?
Sleep is probably one of the most critical things, other than eating well and moving your body. Healthy sleep is critical to longevity and health, because when you don't sleep, your hormones are dysregulated, you become more insulin resistant, you dysregulate your appetite, and it creates a huge deficit in terms of brain repair and function. So sleep is critical.
Is that something that you're speaking to when you're talking to in Cleveland, or you're talking to, let's say, in
Do I
Lennox?
talk about
You're talking
sleep?
about to the patients you work with?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you find people are amenable and open to modifying that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people don't realize is that often the reason they don't sleep are biological reasons. It's inflammation, it's their gut flora, it's nutritional deficiencies, magnesium deficiencies. So we correct their body's systems that are out of balance, and often sleep resets. And people often respond that, when they do the program Eat Fat Get Thin or other programs that I've developed, they all sleep better.
Also seems bidirectional, because they're not getting enough sleep, and therefore their metabolism is slower, their appetite's increased, they're more inclined to eat for high glycemic things in the later day. And by eating like that, and eating late, and eating the wrong processed foods, hurting your digestion, should have an impact, I imagine, deleterious on sleep too.
That's right.
So it's essential. So 3 pillars of health, what would be the best takeaway we could tell our audience of what we should be doing?
I think you want to eat whole, fresh food, lots of good fats, move your body, get sleep, have fun, deal with stress, all that common sense stuff that's not so common.
Terrific. Thanks for speaking with me today.
Thank you.
Awesome.